The Trump administration put together what most people considered impossible: peace deals between Israel and her Arab neighbors. Well, during that time, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, served as one of the main architects of what has become known as the Abraham Accords. Take a look.
Ambassador David Friedman served during one of the most historic times in U.S. Israel relations and historic developments in the Middle East. On May 14, 2018, Friedman presided over the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, a move decades in the making and what many thought could spark a regional war. Instead, peace broke out. Friedman played a key role in the development of the historic agreements between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, the Abraham Accords. For decades, many said it couldn't be done without first solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Friedman and his team broke with that conventional wisdom and produced groundbreaking results. He reveals the behind-the-scenes maneuvering in his new book, Sledgehammer, How Breaking with the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East. From the Oval Office to the halls of power in the region, it's the story behind the Abraham Accords.
Well, joining us now is, in my opinion, the greatest U.S. ambassador to Israel we've ever had, Ambassador David Friedman. He's with us now. His new book is called Sledgehammer, How Breaking with the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East. And Ambassador Friedman, welcome to the 700 Club.
Thank you, Gordon. It's really such an honor to be with you. Thank you so much.
Well, let's talk about the book, and specifically, you've got a big word there, sledgehammer. Why did you use it as the title?
Well, you know, it was the metaphor actually chosen by the New York Times when we opened up what's referred to as the Pilgrimage Road. It's this incredible ancient discovery that connects the Pool of Siloam, which is where Jewish pilgrims would bathe before they ascended to the temple. It connects that to the Temple Mount, and it was this massive, incredible discovery. This entire road was found intact. It was built by Pontius Pilate around the year 30. It was undoubtedly the road that Jesus walked as he ascended to the temple when he visited for the three pilgrimages during the year. And so I was given at this ceremonial opening, I was given a sledgehammer to knock down this ceremonial wall. And of course, it was an incredibly moving event and a peaceful event from our perspective, but New York Times considered this to be highly provocative and referred to me going forward as a sledgehammer. So I chose to turn that metaphor around and I think explain how a sledgehammer, at least metaphorically, was actually what was necessary to solve the gating issues, many of the gating issues in the Middle East.
Well, you certainly broke with the past, and you had to fight your own State Department and your own Secretary of State just to honor the will of Congress in moving the embassy of the United States from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So it seems like a miracle today, but you actually got it done. So how did you do it?
Well, first of all, I think it actually was a miracle. You know, people that assessed my my qualifications often said, you know, either I have insufficient qualifications, or maybe because I'm not a career diplomat, it's a good thing. But few people really understood that I approached this job with a deep sense of faith that I was put in this place. It was so improbable, so unlikely that I would ever get to this position, that I did sense that there was a certain amount of miraculousness to the entire process. So that was, I agree with you. It really was a miracle. Beyond that, look, I came into this being loyal to one person, to the President of the United States. He appointed me. And so all the headwinds that I encountered, whether it was with the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, I mean, once Pompeo came around, it was a whole different experience. He was wonderful. But Tillerson was very negative, and there were others in the administration who did not want to move the embassy, who did not want to bring the United States closer to Israel. And my response to all of them is, you know, go tell it to the president. If he agrees with you, I'll follow his instructions. But I'm going to make a different case to the president, and I'm going to follow his instructions. I'm not working for any of you. You know, I'm almost 60 years old. I've lived a life with a lot of experience. I'm not looking to get a promotion. I'm not looking to get a good report card. I'm looking to achieve things, and I want to achieve the president's agenda. So whatever the president decides, I'm going to follow, but I'm going to make the case to him why we ought to be moving our embassy, why we ought to be recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, why we ought to change our view as to the legality of Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria, and why we can do all that and still make peace with Israel's neighbors. And so it really comes down to the relationship I had with President Trump and the authority and the runway he gave me to move forward on his agenda.
Well, let's talk about another miracle, which is the Abraham Accords. And here you broke with the previous administration. John Kerry, Secretary of State under Obama, actually came out and said there can't be peace with the other Arab nations until you first have a peace accord with the Palestinians. Well, you took a sledgehammer to that idea and broke it. So how did the Abrahams come about? Because it seems like you had to fight the State Department, you had to fight established wisdom, and others weren't even willing to try, and you succeeded.
Well, it began really with the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, because the first thing we had to do was to break that Palestinian veto. And look, we want to make progress in the region. We want Palestinians to have a better life. We can't be more pro-Palestinian than the Palestinian leadership, which unfortunately at this juncture ranges from being corrupt to being terrorists, depending upon which ones you focus on. So we had to end that veto, which they've exercised very effectively for more than 50 years, of, if they weren't on board, nothing moved forward. And by moving the embassy, the message we said was, look, the world's moving forward. The United States made a commitment to the State of Israel through the Jerusalem Embassy Act since 1995. It was endorsed by 425 members of Congress to move the embassy to Jerusalem. We're going to follow that because that's a commitment that the United States made to Israel, and it's a commitment that the president made during his campaign. And so the Palestinians began to realize that they didn't have a veto, and the world stood up and took notice, especially when moving the embassy did not result in any outbreak of violence. And we continued to show unprecedented support for the State of Israel, while at the same time, we stood with Israel, but we also had we had overtures to all these Arab countries. We became good friends to some of these countries. And I think what they recognized is that in this dangerous part of the world, what you really want is to be allied with the United States. Now, when they saw what a good friend we were to Israel, and a lot of them said, you know what, we want to have that kind of relationship with the United States as well. How do we become closer to the United States so that we can have that type of relationship? In all cases, the road led, at least in part, through Israel. We said, look, it's very hard for us to have this kind of relationship with you if you're going to be so hostile to our most cherished ally in the region. And so, through the U.S. sort of being the hub within a spoke of countries, all these countries came to view Israel not as a challenge, not as an adversary, but as an enormous opportunity and an ally. And it just really began with the U.S. taking in a principled, unapologetic stand with the State of Israel.
Well, let's talk about the future then. What do you see as the future of the Abraham Accords? I've said on this program that the greatest enemy of the Palestinian people is the Palestinian Authority. As long as they want to hold on to some kind of dream that they can drive Israel into the sea, as long as Hamas is in control of Gaza, you're never going to see any kind of economy, any kind of future. It's always going to be hopeless. Do you see hope here for peace with the Palestinian Authority? And if so, how do we get there?
Well, I think you're exactly right in your assessment of the current circumstances. The biggest problem is the leadership. The leadership is deeply oppressive of the Palestinian people. Palestinian people, many of whom I got to know well over my 4 years as ambassador, really just want what everybody wants. They want a better life for their children. They want more opportunity, better education. They want more infrastructure within their communities. I mean, these are not complicated things that are undeliverable. They're being held hostage by corrupt and venal leaders. I think those leaders will change over time. They will kind of cycle out. And the most important thing is for the Palestinian people to see the opportunity that exists throughout the region. They're paying very careful attention to the relationship that Israel is forging now with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Sudan, with Morocco. And they see what's coming of it. There's massive trade, tourism, opportunity, a huge amount of business investment. And, the Palestinian people are well educated. They understand that there is a future that they can grab. Their leadership stands between them and a better future. But look, we broke through a lot of molds in order to get the Abraham Accords. I think we will ultimately get to the point where the Palestinians embrace this new Middle East. I think if we were still in office, we would have Saudi Arabia as an Abraham Accords partner. I think we'd have potentially 5 or 10 more. That is the direction of the Middle East. I mean, oddly enough, the Middle East is now, kind of leading the world towards a more peaceful future. I don't think anybody ever thought that would happen 10, 20 years ago. So we're bursting with opportunity. And I think it's just a question of the U.S. Encouraging that and sending the right signals.
All right. Well, the current administration doesn't seem to want to do that, at least from what I'm reading. They've restored funding to UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, which just seems to fund Palestinian discontent. They've restored payments to the Palestinian Authority that reward the martyr payments. They're trying to reopen a consulate to the Palestinian Authority, and of all places, Jerusalem. They're trying to. It looks like they're trying to do a reset. You're working on a foundation to further the Abraham Accords. In the current political environment, the current administration, how can people who are watching right now, how can they help you further peace in the Middle East through what you're doing?
Well, look, our focus, and this was a phrase coined by Ronald Reagan, not by me, but we have the Friedman Center for Peace Through Strength. And the goal of the foundation is to expand the relationships that Israel has forged with Arab countries, but to do it from a position of principle, from a position of strength. Not, as you point out, not by chasing the Palestinians, not by throwing money at corrupt organizations like UNRWA, not by funding, God forbid, the payment of terrorists, which is a reprehensible policy, but by educating the world, the region in the world, that there is a better future. But that future has to be consistent with the Judeo-Christian values that make America great, that make Israel a great nation, that make that relationship strong. It all comes down to me, some very basic, simple things. We became a great nation because we adhered to Judeo-Christian values. Support for Israel is very much part of those values. We can't be asked to compromise that. We have to live within those worlds, but unapologetically to show within that construct how there is a better world available to those who seek it, to those who approach Israel in good faith and wish to make peace. And I think that was the theme of the Abraham Accords, and we're going to continue to pursue that theme diplomatically, educationally, philanthropically, as best as we can.
Well, Ambassador Friedman, thank you for your service. Thank you for all that you've done for Israel. Thank you for what you've done to me personally. My first trip, your first trip was in 1971. I beat you by 2 years. I was 11. My first trip was 1969. You've given me hope that there could be peace in the Middle East. Thank you for that. I thought it was impossible, but you showed not only is it possible, let's go out and achieve it. So thank you. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for your life. And I hope soon you get another opportunity to be an ambassador to Israel again. So thank you.
Well, I hope so too. And thank you for all you've done as well for America and for the state of Israel.
All right. Well, the book is called Sledgehammer, How Breaking Through the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East. You can get it wherever books are sold, and I encourage you to do it. If you want to get a firsthand account of how things can change in Israel, get this book. We'll be back with more of the 700 Club right after